This video will describe the motion produced by the diaphragm depending on the relative stability of its attachment sites. So these first two pictures here are pictures of the diaphragm. This front view is if a picture was taken from the front. You can see the ribs of the lower rib cage on the outside of the diaphragm, and then the diaphragm's lower attachment to the lumbar spine. That diaphragm makes a dome, so the top of the dome is at the bottom of our lung field. It wraps around the inside of our lower rib cage and then attaches down to the lumbar spine. This bottom picture here is if the camera was looking and we flipped the rib cage up, so the camera was taking a picture of the bottom of the rib cage. The diaphragm has a central tendon where the esophagus and some major blood vessels go through, and that central tendon is surrounded by a muscular ring. The motion produced by the diaphragm will depend on the relative stability of these three attachment sites: the central tendon, the attachment to the lumbar spine, and the attachment to the inside of the rib cage. So when someone is standing upright, gravity pulls the guts down into the pelvis and away from the central tendon of the diaphragm. What this does is allows greater diaphragm descent, and so because that central tendon is allowed to move down to a greater degree, there isn't as much action at the lower rib cage. There isn't as much of a bucket handle effect, so rib cage expansion is likely less in this upright position when compared to supine. When someone lays on their back, the guts are allowed to travel up further into the rib cage, and this creates greater resistance to diaphragm descent during inhalation. So because that central tendon isn't allowed to descend as far into the abdominal cavity, what happens is there is a greater bucket handle effect of the lower ribs. So the lower rib cage is allowed to expand to a greater extent side to side during inhalation. Another position to consider is a side lying position, in this case right side lying. And researchers have actually found that the dependent lung, the side the person is laying on, that lung's expansion is actually restricted. And the reason for this is when someone is in right side lying, the guts fall to the right side of the abdominal cavity and move up further into the right side of the rib cage, which would normally allow greater bucket handle expansion. But because the individual is laying on their right side, their body weight is compressing the rib cage, as well as the heart and lung drooping to the right side. That right side of the rib cage is now being compressed from both sides and the bottom, restricting its expansion. Talking about the top side here, while there is greater expansion allowed of the top side of the rib cage, because the guts fall to the right, there isn't much resistance to diaphragm descent on the left side, and for that reason there isn't a great bucket handle effect. So during inhalation here, you won't get a significant widening of the lower rib cage for these reasons. So hopefully this video helps just describe how an individual's position can influence the relative stability of the diaphragm's attachments and therefore its action on the lower rib cage.